you're not 100% sure that God is God. And I'll say, no, I'm not. But that's all right. Because when you read scripture, that's where faith comes in. Like if I was 100% sure, I wouldn't need faith, which would actually be the opposite of the message of the gospel, right? Like the whole idea is to have faith. I don't need faith to know that I'm breathing right now. I know that I'm breathing. I do need faith to believe in the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. I do need faith. I'm not 100% sure, but faith fills that gap. And I think for me, it's taking those moments and making them pillars in your life and building your life around pillars. What are the things in your life you're choosing to build your life around? And it's identifying what those pillars are and then building my whole life around those. And even in these seasons, those pillars, they don't change.
Welcome to Along the Way. I'm John Matarazzo, your host and fellow traveler. Thank you for joining me along my way as I try to become more like Jesus every day. For this episode, I'm joined by Pastor Joshua Gagnon. He's actually one of the last in-person guests that I had on my former TV show, RealLife. He was talking about his new book, It's Not Over, Leaving Behind Disappointment and Learning to Dream Again. Josh accidentally started a church while he was running a successful New England drywall company. His small group Bible study grew into what became Next Level Church, with campuses in 10 locations spanning different East Coast states. In this conversation, you'll hear how his faith fills the gaps in his life and establishes unchanging pillars of faith. I'll get to our conversation in just a moment, but as always, I want to thank you for listening to Along the Way. I hope that you like what you hear and you subscribe. You can connect with me online as well. All of my socials and contact links are in the show notes, and you can check out all of my episodes at my website, alongtheway.media. There is an easy way to join my email list, and you can find out more about me too. I hope that you check it out and you connect with me. I would love to hear from you. I also have a Patreon page if you want to help me to continue to put out these Along the Way episodes. If you'd like to become a Patreon, simply go to patreon.com/alongtheway and select the level of your support. The link to become a Patreon supporter is in my show notes. And now, here's my Along the Way conversation with Joshua Gagnon. Josh Gagnon, it's great to have you on Along the Way. Thank you so much for being here. And we were just talking before we hit record that the last time we saw each other, really, you were one of the last guests that we had in studio on my RealLife program, which has since been rebranded and changed to Hope Today. But you were one of the last people that we had before the world shut down from the coronavirus thing. So you were talking about your book, It's Not Over, and I'm hoping that this lockdown is over soon, but I'm praying that that's not what we're talking about, that it's not over. So Josh, thanks so much for being here with us.
Yeah, it's good to be here with you, John. It was funny to think back. I think we said it was 3 days before the world got shut down that I was in studio with you guys.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so hopefully that interview wasn't what shut the world down.
No, I don't think so. I'm going to say that interview gave people hope because it actually was recorded so that it aired the following week while everybody was in panic mode. Hopefully they saw the message that it's not over because God is still in this thing. The world's not over. God still has a hope and a plan for our future.
Amen.
I do want to talk about your book, but I always like to hear people's stories of how God has led you to where you are today. Because you're a pastor, you're kind of flying all over the place normally, but God has done a lot of stuff in your life. So tell me where you are now, but let's go back and then look at how God has brought you to there.
Yeah, I had the honor of growing up in a home that believed in Jesus, and it wasn't a perfect home, as you know, but we did have our faith in Jesus and got into athletics when I was in high school, well, my whole life. And in high school, really athletics dominated my life. So I kind of stopped going to church throughout high school. I played college basketball, didn't go to church throughout college, really had a relationship with God, but it was more about praying just that he'd help me score some points in a basketball game rather than that relationship. And
I think God still hears that.
Yeah, exactly. And so after I got out of college, I played a little bit of basketball in places other than the United States because I wasn't good enough to play in the United States. And so ended up having a passion to I came back home and my mom said, there's a pretty girl playing the piano at church. You should come. I said, that could get me there. And
that's a good enough reason. Yeah.
Yeah. I ended up dating that girl for a few years. We didn't end up marrying her. I did meet my wife at that church, but that really was the thing that got me back into God's church. And honestly, while I was there, I just had this burning desire in my heart to tell people about the God that I believed in. And I realized that a lot of people saw the church as judgmental, hypocritical, and hateful. And because they saw the church that way, they saw God that way. And a lot of people were stuck in that tension where they didn't want to believe in God because of the way they saw the church. And my heart really broke for that, because I agreed with a lot of people. I agree with that. I agree that the church has often given Jesus a bad name, unfortunately. It really represented the character of our God in a poor way. And so I said, what if we started church for my friends? And really it was more of a Bible study. We call it a church now, but I was taking courses online for Bible school. And I was like, listen, let's just start meeting, hanging out, just inviting my non-believing friends over, just have a conversation about faith. And, we had, people from all different beliefs, all different religions, just hanging out, talking. And Jesus moved and did what he does, and lives were changed. And we started Next Level Church out of that little meeting, and it's grown to 10 locations and throughout New England and in Florida. And God's done great things, but it really was just born out of a desire to just introduce people to a God that loved them, and a God that calls us to love others, and a God that isn't fear-based, but is faith-based.
So are you telling me that you kind of became a pastor by accident?
Complete accident. Yeah, complete. As a matter of fact, I owned a drywall company while I was having this Bible study. I was making a couple $100,000 a year at 25, 26 years old. Yeah. Had nice vehicles, a house, and we got to that crossroads where I had to give all that up because Next Level started growing. I got over 100. I got over 100 people coming, and I was like, okay, we're going to have to make a decision. Is it going to be going after this full time, or is it going to be this business? And, we moved out of our home. We gave up our vehicles. We really had to make a life decision, because what we had created in a short amount of time was based on an income that I wasn't going to be walking into. And so, yeah, it really was accidental. And it's in New England, the least church region of the country, which you wouldn't plant a church here if you could choose.
I am well aware of that. I've done a lot of ministry in the Boston area. And actually, when I was in Youth with a Mission for those 8 years, part of our base out of Pittsburgh, we sent 6 people to start the YWAM Boston base. And so we were sending a lot of teams up there and just trying to till the ground to get it ready so that there could be a Youth with a Mission ministry center there. So I got to work with a lot of those churches, and I know exactly what you're talking about. It's cold physically, but the ground in people's hearts are a little bit cold, and you need to work that a little bit. So when God is moving like that, that is awesome that you said, this is more important than the worldly gain that I can have by sticking with this literally sheetrock. And, let's focus on the rock of Jesus Christ. And Jesus said to Peter, on this rock, I will build my church. So you just exchanged different types of rocks right there.
Yeah, I just changed rocks.
Oh, man. So how did your church grow from one location to 10? I mean, that's a lot of work, and there's a lot of logistics that needs to happen with that.
Yeah, when we started Next Level, really early on, I had a passion to have multiple locations. Just my personality is more entrepreneurial. I kind of see things as expanding. I like to build. I like to grow things. I knew God would use me to do that. And I also knew that I need to surround myself with people who are called to shepherd and really counsel, and that pastoral presence. And I would say I'm a good pastor. I'm probably more apostolic in my gifting, and I can pastor, but probably more naturally apostolic. And so really from the day one, before I even knew, because back when we started 12 years ago, really being multi-site wasn't yet a thing that a lot of people did. We were actually the first church in New England to use full video experiences based on teaching for video venues. And so early on, I just knew that was something that God had wired me. I think a lot of people, we forget when God calls you, he doesn't call you and ask you to become a different person. He uses the personality he's called. He had uniquely gifted me and equipped me and knew my characteristics. He knew the desires he had given me, and then he called me. And so I didn't now need to pretend I was an entrepreneur or a builder. I can be that. I just got to make sure I'm wise enough to surround myself with people who can care for things that necessarily I wouldn't naturally care for. And so, yeah, we launched our first location a year into the story. So we have 2 locations right away, and we've acquired 5 other churches. So churches that were struggling have come to us and said, hey, listen, you guys are doing an amazing thing. We can't really keep the doors open. Could we become part of Next Level? And so we call it adopting them, welcome them in, and they take on our culture and our vision. And so, yeah, we have our next building just finished to open up a new location, and we'll wait. Of course, we can't open it right now because of everything that's happening. But that's kind of a little bit of the multi-site story. It's always a part of our DNA.
Yeah. So you've always wanted to grow and expand. If you want to do something, you want to do it well and you want to do it big. And especially if you're going to do it for the kingdom of God, that's a huge deal. I mean, that's a big undertaking though, because you have staff at 8H campus, you have people there, and people have issues and people need Jesus, and creating a team that can actually pastor, that can mentor, that can help and give care to those congregants is remarkable, to be able to coordinate all of that.
Yeah, we got a great staff.
How do you stay sane?
I never claimed to be.
It's a good answer. Good answer.
I can honestly say, and I know it can come across cliche in a way, but I got a great team, a great group of leaders. Everybody really just fits into their role, and nobody's fighting for the other person's role. We all just feel confident in what God's called us to do. None of us feel good enough, but we rest in his goodness. And we just kind of live in that lane of saying, hey, this is nobody's fighting for my job. Nobody's trying to take the lead pastor position. The people on my directional team, they're not fighting for each other. It is not like this hierarchy. It's not this pyramid. We're all here. We all feel confident that God's called us here, and we're just doing life together. And so, we hire location pastors that don't want to be lead pastors because it would be bad for us to hire a location pastor who has this passion to be a lead pastor, because he's not going to feel fulfilled in that role. And so we make sure that the hires lead towards those gift settings. And so, there's a lot of details in it, but it's not as hard as it may seem from the outside.
Yeah. But I mean, you're immersed in that. So you're thinking and you're trying to figure out, how do I take the gifts that God has given me and multiply that in other people as well. And so that's really cool that you've been able to incorporate those giftings and callings and see that in people that are like, you are a campus pastor.
Yeah.
Not that you don't want to be great. No, you want to be a great campus pastor. He doesn't want to be somebody that's taking on a network. He wants to be on the front lines with the people there. That's so cool that you're able to identify that the way that you do.
Yeah, I think it's important to place people in a position where they're not that they're never going to leave it, but I think we're doing people a disservice if we're hiring people and positioning people in roles that are just stepping stones. Mm-hmm. And so not that it can't end up being a step that we took, but we don't hire people with that intention. And we really do hire people that really believe this is where they belong right now in that season. And so like David in the shepherd field, that they can look back and say, I fought off the bear and the lion, so now that I can face Goliath. However, I wasn't disgruntled in the shepherd's field. That's where I really believed I should be at that time, so that God could prepare me for what he had prepared for me. And so we try to find people that aren't just getting here to take the next step, but they're getting here and they're content in that call. And that may change, but we don't hire people waiting to take the next step.
Yeah. So you said something earlier that I thought was really interesting. You had about 5 churches that wanted to be adopted by you. And you also mentioned that you infused your culture into them. Can you explain what that means, being adopted into the church? Because I know there's a lot of spiritual application with that. But let's talk about the culture too. Like, how do you take your culture at next level and then incorporate it into somebody that they've been doing something a particular way that's different for a long time? How did you guys do that?
Yeah, a lot of the churches that we've adopted, acquired, merged, call it what you may, we would call it an acquisition, only because we didn't merge visions. They took on our vision and our culture. So we didn't merge cultures. They became us. But that sounds a little bit harsh. So we'll use the word adoption and merger. There's churches that have living organs. There's living organs, but they're not really alive. And so we've gone to a lot of them, or they've come to us and they've said, hey, listen, we want to be a part of what God's doing. You guys are alive. You guys are growing. God's using you. We've got this facility. It's paid off, or it's almost paid off. And we've got all these assets and we've got these people, and we've been stuck here for years. We haven't been seeing anything happen. And we've done it, I think 5 or maybe 6 times, maybe 6 acquisitions. And each time we've done it, we've seen the church at times of 20 or 30 people expand to 400, 500, 600 people overnight. And I'll tell you, there's nothing more special than standing up at the 1-year mark when they have hundreds of people worshiping Jesus, 600-700 salvations that year, and just celebrating the saints that were there prior to that adoption that were so faithful. It's hard to give up what you like best. And a lot of the churches we've acquired, they would rather hymns, and they would rather pews, and they would rather a different style than what we are. However, these saints say, I'm going to forfeit what I love for what I love more. which is people meeting Jesus and being relevant in the culture we live in. And so we've really stepped into churches that weren't necessarily reaching the culture we live in well. At one point they were, but they didn't change with culture. And we step in and we kind of remake them. We redo the building. We basically preach the same message on a different platter. And we use that. And so as far as culture is just a set of beliefs and values. It's a feeling. It's what you would say you are prior to anybody necessarily declaring it. For instance, Chick-fil-A is a pretty popular Christian chicken. And if you say thank you to them, they say my pleasure back. That's what they've been trained. It's their culture to say my pleasure back. You go to McDonald's, it's thank you or yeah, but at Chick-fil-A, if you say thank you, you're going to get back my pleasure. That's just a part of their culture. It's a part of their values to make their customers feel valuable. And so I would say we go in and we send in people that know who we are, have our culture, have our DNA, speak the language, understand how to create the environments, understand how to communicate our stance and how to communicate God's grace. We stand for what we're for, not what we're against. And so all those types of things that create and make up our value, they're able to communicate and create a culture to where it identifies to the vision. Yeah.
So what would you say is your main message that's on your heart? You were on my TV program to talk about your book, It's Not Over. Would that be what you feel is your main message right now?
That's a good question. I think that'll always be one of my main messages. Mark Batterson, who forwarded the book, a friend of mine, said, don't write a book unless you're willing to talk about what you wrote about for your whole life.
Yeah.
And so, that is people living with hope, people believing that they just weren't saved, to get to heaven, but Jesus came to earth to give us hope here on earth. I don't want to limp to heaven, but I want to soar on my way to heaven. I think that's God's desire, right? For us to live lives of purpose. I think in this season, though, if I'm just being real, John, I think in this season with COVID and everything, I think it's more just trying to find that purpose and living with that hope for myself. I think a lot of us, we came up against a pretty real reality where a lot of our purpose, a lot of what we found comfort in, a lot of things were stripped away. And so I think, my big message right now would be for me to not hang my faith on my calling, but hang my faith on Jesus and make sure that my identity isn't wrapped up in what I do for others under his umbrella, but what he's done for me and who he is to me. I think in ministry, sometimes we can really just focus on the right lingo. We can focus on building everybody else's faith. We can read the Bible looking for sermons or looking for truth to point out, but it never really intersects with our heart, right? It never really, at times it can become about everybody else, but you forget it actually has to start with you. And so I'd say in this season, just being transparent in my relationship with Jesus and making sure that I'm not just a Christian that gets paid in ministry, but that I follow after Jesus.
I find it's really difficult I'm a natural doer. I want to be active, and give me a task, I'm going to complete it. Give me something to do, and I'm going to tackle it. And I think maybe guys are wired that way, but basically everybody can be. It's not gender specific. But during this time, we've all had to shut down. We've all had to be more introspective. We've all had to distance ourselves from the things that we used to do. And I can honestly say, for a little while, I was good at seeking the Lord during those times, but I've slipped back into the human doing rather than the human being with the Lord. So what advice would you have for maintaining that mentality?
Yeah, well, I went through the month of August, and I just really got kind of away from everything ministry wise. I usually do in the month of August, but this month, this was a little bit different. And I just got to the place where I asked myself if I wanted to continue to do this. And I really put it out there with my wife. I was like, man, at the end of the day, we started a great church. God's moved in great ways. Thousands of people giving their life to Jesus. But is this something that I want to go into again? Like when this whole thing when this whole passes, am I ready to go back into this again for the next 10 to 15 years? Yeah. Am I ready to go back into this? And I even said, listen, I want to ask myself, I've been preaching Jesus and he's a pillar in my life, but am I still sold out for Jesus? Am I still sold out for the way? Like at the end of the day, is this something I preach or am I still just sold? Is this still me? Like, you can get so caught up in ministry. You can get so caught up in the faith you're declaring that it doesn't really identify, or you can fail at making sure it's a personal thing. And so, I just over that month and I decided, thankfully for me, I knew that Jesus, I'm only ever about 80% sure about anything. And a lot of people say, like, you're not 100% sure that God is God. And I'll say, no, I'm not. But that's all right. Because when you read scripture, that's where faith comes in. Like if I was 100% sure, I wouldn't need faith, which would actually be the opposite of the message of the gospel, right? Like the whole idea is to have faith. And if you're absolute truth, like I don't need faith to know that I'm breathing right now. I know that I'm breathing. I do need faith to believe in the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. I do need faith. I'm not 100% sure, but faith fills that gap. And I think for me, it's taking those moments and making them pillars in your life and building your life around pillars. What are the things in your life you're choosing to build your life around? And so for me, it's identifying those as family. It's identifying those as that pillar, that faith in Jesus. It's identifying those as my calling. It's identifying what those pillars are and then building my whole life around those. And even in these seasons, those pillars, they don't change. They stay, they remain. And so that's one of the things that's helped me get through a season where at times I just want to do. Yeah.
Now, I know this might be a little bit personal, but
you can ask anything you want.
Oh, thank you. You just talked about in August, you really asked the question of, should I continue?
Yeah.
In your book, it's not over. The byline is leaving behind disappointment and learning to dream again. And I love that. So there's so many disappointments in our life. COVID and this whole year of 2020 has been a disappointment. So were you going through that as well? Or is this something you do on a regular basis that you try to reassess that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I go as deep on a regular basis. Every August I work on my content. I work on just God refining me. But this time was a little bit different where I guess I still am to a degree, just really getting into the nitty gritty of what I believe the church should look like, what I believe sin looks like, what I believe, so often I feel like the church has feared people into obedience, and it's so strange to me. And really figuring out how I can hold on to the truth of Scripture, which I believe in, yet find out a way that I can communicate it where it's just not fear-based. It's everything seems so fear-based. Growing up, it's don't have sex, you're going to go to hell, right? It's like, wait a minute. Is that really the message? No, it's not the message. The message is a message of wholeness. God wants us to be whole, right? So like there's actually love involved in this message. And so, I wouldn't say I didn't want to ever walk away from God or give up on my faith in Jesus. That's been secure. It was more or less, do I want to put up with the Western civilized church any longer? Because I feel like it's just become so polluted. I feel like what are we doing? We put on these little fake rock concerts that aren't as good as secular ones. And then we get a talking head on stage for 45 minutes where people only really want to listen for 20 at best. And then we call it church. And then COVID leaves. And we find out 48% of people who attended church regularly haven't been to an online experience or a physical one since COVID. So what are we as a church? And it's just kind of coming into that. So yeah, leaving behind disappointment. And of course, during COVID, it's been super disappointing. Everything that we worked towards seemed to crash. And all the purpose that we had and plans we had crashed. And so you have to give away control fully to God. And so I think for me, it was more, what are we even doing as a church? Like, would Jesus call himself a Christian? Because I'll be honest with you. If you look at the reputation of who Christians are today, I'm not sure Jesus would be affiliated with that, right? So if Jesus may not take on the identity of what we call ourselves under him, maybe we should start asking ourselves, why does culture look at us different than what Jesus declares we should be? One of the things I love about this podcast is we talk about the disciples before they knew who Jesus was, right? Before they knew who he was. Yeah. Yet when you look at the church globally, or at least the church I grew up in, you have to know who Jesus is, declare who he is before you can be a part. Yet you can be a follower of Jesus without believing who he is, right? He said, come follow me. Come follow me. So for me, that's always been something in my heart. Like Jesus asks us to follow him before he ever asks us to believe in him. We can be followers of Jesus. And while we're in his presence, like it was made known to the disciples, we will then grasp through the presence of his Holy Spirit who he is, which will then change our understanding of him. And so, like, for me, it feels like the church for so long has always been like, hey, listen, if you want to become part of us, you have to believe. In order to serve on the band, you have to believe. In order to be in the lobby greeting, you have to believe. I don't know, John. I think Jesus would just say, hey, listen, everybody's welcome. Just come on in here. Everybody here can follow me. At the end of the day, some of you will believe, some of you aren't there yet, but my presence ultimately will win you over.
Yeah. And, we need to be in Jesus's presence for sure.
Yeah.
And not just the idea of Jesus, but we need to be in his presence. There's a lot of good teaching out there. There's a lot of things that sound like Jesus, but if we're not actually with Jesus, and Jesus said about his voice that my sheep know my voice and they're not going to be pulled astray, and they won't turn to another voice. So we as Christians, we as believers in Christ need to first and foremost learn what his voice really sounds like. That way we're not going to be pulled by another voice. But then we need to make sure that we are constantly paying attention to what that voice is. Because I would much rather have God speak to me in a gentle whisper than in a giant a giant windstorm, just like the prophet Elijah. And so how do you stay soft and tender with the Lord so that he is able to whisper to you?
Yeah, for me, I think I've built that into my DNA. For me, it's less about the 1 hour or half hour in the morning where I just read and pray nonstop. For me, I like to look at my prayer life just as a constant relationship with Jesus. I don't have a half hour prayer time. I have several hours throughout the day or minutes throughout the day, like constantly in that heart of prayer, constantly in that attitude where I'm trying to be sensitive to the guidance of the Holy Spirit. Pray for this person, think of this person. I've done it dozens of times already today. And so I'm the type of personality, if you try to sit me down for 30 minutes and tell me just to pray, it's not going to be good.
Yeah. So when your mom sent you to the corner, to time out, that was really a tough punishment.
That's as bad as it gets.
Yeah.
I would have rather to borrow soap or something, and so, staying in his presence it's hunting season now in New England as far as archery goes. And so, man, I'll be in the woods this afternoon for about 4 hours, 3.5 hours, all by myself.
Oh, nice.
And I'll tell you, I journal, I talk to God, I get lost in nothing. I literally look forward to that time alone in the woods like I would sitting down with Tom Brady for lunch.
Well, how do you feel about Tom Brady, betraying you guys and heading south for the season?
It's
a little sore spot. We don't have to go there.
Let me just say, if you give any team to that good at 20 years, you can make your own decisions from there on out.
That's true. That's true. So, we've just talked about COVID. We've just talked about how the church has kind of gone through that. How do you see your church coming out of that? You're across a couple different states, so obviously there's different situations in each campus, but how are you leading during this time, and how are you planning on leading out of this time?
Yeah, during the time I'm trying to lead, vulnerably and just being honest with our team, with our church. The reality is most people feel like leaders have to have the answers, but in a season like COVID, as leaders, we don't have the answers because we don't know what's going to be allowed in a month or two. We don't know. I know that we've opened up our physical locations, but we only have about 20% of the people attend. And I think that's nationally what I'm hearing. For churches that are open, it's super thin as far as physical attendance. And, we have a high online attendance. And we're going to continue. We started a thing called house parties, where we feel like we're going to, keep that potentially in our DNA looking forward, where it's more like home church. And they watch the message, they get together on the weekends, and it may be something where we expand globally, where people can have house parties. So it kind of becomes what we do. So we're looking at trying to make decisions that aren't sideways moves, but forward moves. We don't want to do things during COVID that are just sideways, but we want to do things during COVID that we're going to keep doing on the other side of it. I'm hopeful that here in the next months to come, life will not look like it used to, because I don't know if we should try to go back to what it was, because I think a lot of good has happened in this, even though it's hard to see. I think the church has an opportunity to really declare what it's all about, what it means, and why it is. I think we have an opportunity to look at the parable where the seed was thrown on the ground, and some of it was pushed out by the thorns, and others of it was taken away by the birds. I think we have an opportunity to say, hey, listen, in these seasons, it's you're the seed, and who you are in this season really defines your relationship with Jesus. And so I think a lot of good will come out of this. I'm going to keep trying to lead with clarity, and up to now, we haven't had to make too many drastic decisions. I'm thankful for that. And if we have to, we have to. That's the difference between leadership and management. Management keep things going. Leaders make hard decisions that are painful. And so, if we get placed in that position, we have to make hard decisions, which that's laying off staff or whatever it may be. Well, that's why you're a leader. That's when leaders are called to lead. But I think clarity inside of confusion is leadership. And so we're going to try to continue to do that.
For sure. So I got to ask you,
Go for it.
As you look back at your life, okay, just like, the whole theme of this podcast is about the Emmaus Road and how the disciples, this is after Jesus died on the cross, and then now there's rumor of him being alive again, being risen from the dead. So there's two disciples that were walking from Jerusalem to Emmaus, and they're met by this traveler who we know, looking back at it, that it was actually Jesus, but they had no clue at the time. And they invited him to just join along on the walk. And so they finally get to Emmaus. They invite him to come in. And Jesus sits down at the table with them, blesses the food, and breaks the bread. And I love what it says in Luke 24:32. This is just after Jesus blessed the food, broke the bread, and poof, he disappears right in front of them. The disciples turn to each other and say, "Weren't our hearts burning within us along the way as he was revealing the scriptures to us?" So Josh, what's a moment in your life where you look back and you say, you know what, my heart was burning there, but I didn't realize it in the moment, but I see it now, and now I'm going to make some changes. Tell me about a story like that.
Yeah. In the book, I talk about how my first go around at writing a book didn't go as I planned. And, I had an agent reach out to me a few years ago and said, "Hey, listen, you pastor in a big church. You should write a book. Have you ever thought about it?" And I said, "Absolutely." And he talked me into writing up a book proposal. We sent it out to all the big publishers, and one after one got back and said, no, you're in New England, it's the least church region of the country. Nobody buys books there. We're not interested. And I remember the last lead ran out. My heart was broken. And I remember crying in the shower and kind of even hiding it from my wife, not wanting to face that disappointment. And a year later, another agent reaches out and says, "Have you thought about writing a book?" And I was like, I'm not getting back to this person. Mm-hmm. And a year went by before I got back to that second agent, and his name's Alex. And finally I got back and I said, this fire is burning inside of me. I have to write. I have to continue to move in this direction. And we put the book proposal out, and 6 of the largest publishers made offers, a 2-book deal on this book. And it was a 2-book deal, and everybody was offering the same thing as far as advancements and all that. And it was a very big blessing. I look back on that, and it's funny. It's in the shower where you're crying, feeling like God's nowhere to be found, where when you look back at it, you recognize if God had given you what you wanted then, he would have robbed you of what he was trying to do in you then.
Wow.
And I look back at Jesus being right there in the shower with me, and I'm like, God, I didn't even seek out this agent. What are you even doing? I didn't seek this out. You brought this agent to me. I thought this was all you, God. Why couldn't you? And just complaining. And yet I imagine God's just smiling, saying, Josh, I'm doing more in you than I'm doing through you, so that I can do more through you than you'd ever imagine if you just let me do the work. And so I think that's one of those seasons where, I didn't see Jesus in that season, but now on the opposite side, I was able to write this book, It's Not Over, which has, by God's grace, sold thousands and thousands of copies. And they're now hearing, I believe, a message that is way better than the one I would have put out 4 years ago. But I had to let God do that work in me. I mentioned David earlier. I didn't put this in the book. I should have, but David earlier, where he had to have the work had to happen in the pasture before he could get to the palace. And I think we have to be faithful in the pasture, and it's not hard. And I think for some of us, this COVID thing is that pasture. I think that this is where we're just living in the mundane. It feels like we're going through the motions. We're just being faithful when it feels like there's not much fruit. I think it's in these seasons where if we're faithful in the pasture, defeating the lion and the bear, and God will give us an opportunity to overcome a Philistine, and then eventually we may even be in the palace. And so, I think I see Jesus in the shower with me clearly. If you could have asked me then, do you want the book deal knowing what I know now? I'd say, no way. I'll wait for it. And so that's where God was there when I'm not even sure I noticed him.
Yeah. And when you were with us, I wrote down this quote: "Never let someone speak into your dreams unless they are willing to sweat your dreams."
Come on.
Was that you that said that? Yep.
That's me.
Where did that quote come from? Because I've
me.
never heard that before. I wrote it on a note on a piece of paper and put it in your book.
Thank you.
Tell me where that came from.
Yeah. Probably from a hunting. No, it's just, that was just me. There's a chapter in the book where I talk about relationships and the damage they do on our dreams. And by dreams, I just mean hope. I mean purpose. And I talk about vampires, zombies, sidekicks, and heroes in the book being the 4 different types of relationships we all encounter. And I talk about how so many of us are talked out of our purpose. So many of us are talked out of a greater tomorrow because of the people we allow in our lives. But I've learned never to let anybody speak into my dreams unless they're willing to sweat alongside of me in my chase to them. I don't want to be the guy who gives up on my future because people in the stands with ketchup and mustard all over their face were yelling at me while I was on the field.
Yeah.
I don't want to give up on my dreams because everybody who was outside the huddle talked me out of it. I want to have people close to me who are sweating, correcting, encouraging, challenging me. That's fine, but they need to at least be on the field with me.
Right.
I need to at least know they believe in me. And so I challenge everybody never to let anybody speak in your dream unless they're on the field sweating alongside of you. Don't let the person with ketchup and mustard talk you out of your best.
I love that. I love that. I'm so glad I asked about that. Just a couple short little questions here.
Sure.
If you could go back in time and talk to younger Josh and give yourself some advice with the knowledge that you have right now, what season of life would you go in and what would you tell yourself? And if you can, kind of set up the scene, tell me what's going on and why you would want to Doc Brown that, or Marty McFly, that situation.
Boy, so there's so many of them. I'll pick one because I think I'd go back to every season. There's this imagery. People are going to think I'm crazy, always crying in showers. But I can remember Next Level was 2 years old. I was looking out and I had this huge dream in my heart to see God build his kingdom and use me to do it. And I remember we were in a place we called Calais. It was our own coffee shop. We had experiences at, and I can remember I would go back into the bathroom after I got done preaching. And I'd often be very discouraged because there just wasn't many people in the room. And one time I went back and I just got on the bathroom floor in like a fetal position, just was crying. I can remember my staff came over and they were knocking on the door because we'd meet in this room and beat each other up. It felt like talking about, that night.
Not physically. It was like
looking back at the experience of what happened, and they were knocking on the door of the bathroom. And I can remember just not wanting to face them and not wanting to even face anybody because it just felt so disappointing. It just felt like, my dream in my heart that I had, I could see it with my eyes, but I could see it in my heart, but I never saw it with my eyes. I've had many of those little moments in the journey of Next Level Church. Everybody seems like they're an instant success story from the outside looking in. But in this course of 12 years, there's been a lot of moments where I wondered if God was going to show up and why things weren't moving the way I thought they would. And I think what I would tell myself in all those seasons is you're going to expect God to do more in the immediate than you are the ultimate. But God often does more in the ultimate than he does in the immediate. Like stay faithful. Don't put the stress on yourself to accomplish everything today. If God gave you a dream that you can accomplish in a year, it wasn't big enough. Just stay faithful. Just stop worrying about how quick things are happening and how much fruit you're seeing. So I think I would tell myself that I'm gonna expect more to happen in the immediate than I should, and I'm gonna undervalue what God can do in the ultimate through a lifetime of faithfulness.
That's good. And how do you think a younger version of yourself would receive that?
Not too good, because I heard that when I was about that age, and I still had to go through the pain of it. But I think there's some things in life where, I'm not the oldest person in the room, but I've been around the track a few times now, and I think at the end of the day, sometimes you just have to go through the pain in order to get to the other side and see its purpose. And the goal is not to embrace the pain. The goal is to not live in the same pain over and over again. And so for me, I think I've matured out of that pain where I don't think that would happen again to me. Matter of fact, I know it wouldn't. Yeah. Because I've faced disappointing times before and I haven't reacted the same way.
Well, that's good. That's good. You've grown. And I hope that all of us grow in that way too. Life is not something that, it's not like the Matrix where you can just download new skills and new experiences in a moment. The path that we're on, God has us on for a reason. Yeah. And there's verses in our lives that kind of give us something to anchor onto, to hold on to. And Josh, what is a verse that has meant so much to you like that has helped you kind of sustain getting through?
Yeah. As a type A personality, a builder, Galatians 6:9 is kind of my verse where don't get tired of doing what is good, but at the right time, you'll reap a harvest of blessing if you don't give up. And there's been many times I've had to, I can't tell you, hundreds of times where in those moments as a type A builder, even in moments like COVID, just don't get tired of doing what is good. You may not be seeing the fruit you wished you'd see. You may not be living with the same anticipation or energy or adrenaline that you once lived with. You may not be traveling. You may not be being asked to do much. You may feel purposeless at times. However, don't get tired of doing what is good at the right time. And remember, God's delays are not God's denials. So at the right time, you'll reap a harvest of blessing if you don't give up. And so I would say that verse is probably a verse that I've gone back to more than any other verse in the last 10 years.
Yeah. That's good. Well, speaking of the right time, we are getting close to wrapping up here, but I want to give you an opportunity to tell our listeners where they can find out more about you and how they can follow you on social media, get a hold of your book, all that good stuff.
Yeah, Josh Gagnon is my Instagram. It's where I do a lot of hanging out. Facebook, I think, is Pastor Josh or something like that. But Josh Gagnon on Instagram, and my book can be bought anywhere books are sold. And I think it'll be an encouraging read for anybody. At least I hope it is. And if it's not, just call me or text me or send an Instagram message. I'll give you your money back.
Yeah. Is there anything about your church?
Money back guarantee.
Website or anything like that?
It's not overbook.com, joshuagagnon.com. Yeah, you can just put me in Google and you'll probably find me. You may hear a lot of lies. Some of them may be true, but
well, I'll make sure to put the links to the good ones in the show notes here so that people can find
only the good ones, John. Come on.
Yeah.
You got to invite me back too. I love night time with you guys on your show. You guys, class act, class act, what you guys do over there.
Yeah. Yeah. I really appreciate that. And Josh, I know the woods are calling you. You've got it's archery season, so I want to let you get going, but I want to thank you so much for allowing me to join you along your way.
Thanks, John.
I hope that you enjoyed this conversation that I had with Pastor Joshua Gagnon. As I look back at this conversation, one of the things that I'm taking away from this is to not let myself be talked out of my purpose. I love his quote when he said, "Don't let anyone speak into your dreams unless they are willing to sweat alongside of you." That is a really great way to look at it. Who are the people that we are allowing to speak into our lives? This last week, I was in my own small group, which my church calls connection groups, and the conversation was about calling each other up rather than calling each other out. We need to be surrounding ourselves with people who will not only call us up because they see the potential in us, but people who will be willing to sweat alongside of us. Sometimes that looks like actual physical sweat, like working out in a gym or on a physical project, helping somebody in need. Yesterday, I was helping a friend move, and yes, it was hot and we were getting a little sweaty, but it meant a lot because that was helping his vision of moving his family into a new house. Other times, it means coming alongside someone in a difficult time through prayer and support. There's many different ways that God is calling us to sweat alongside of each other to accomplish the purposes and plans that He has for our lives. And if you're willing to come alongside somebody, then God will bring somebody alongside of you, too. Even when you're going through disappointments in your life, it is important to have faith and know that if God is in it with you, it's not over. I'll be providing Pastor Joshua Gagnon's links in the show notes. Thank you for listening to Along the Way. If you've enjoyed joining me along my way, please share this episode with a friend who you think will be encouraged by this podcast. Also, please rate and review Along the Way on iTunes. That helps more people discover Along the Way. And subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and at my website, alongtheway.media. I hope that you've enjoyed this part of my journey, and may you realize when Jesus is walking with you along your way. Along the Way is honored to be part of the Charisma Podcast Network. You can find tons of spirit-filled content from their vast catalog of podcasts, including my Monday through Friday news stories on the Charisma News Podcast. Go to CPN Shows to see the full list and latest episodes.